This is Spilling Royal Tea with Sean Mandell.
So Maggie, this week, a few things happened. We got a royal Easter procession to church, how Meghan and Kate interacted in their royal walkabout after Queen Elizabeth's passing, particularly how Kate felt about that, and some advice that Meghan got from the late Queen when she joined the royal family. Plus, we have a very great guest to talk about the questions of race and the future of the royal family, Nazir Afzal. He is a former chief prosecutor in the UK. He is a chancellor of Manchester University and also an OBE, an officer of the British Empire, which he was made by Queen Elizabeth in 2005. So, a lot to talk about this week.
Our first OBE.
Our first OBE. So without further ado, let's spill the royal tea. This is Spilling Royal Tea, a podcast that follows the piping hot stories of the British royal family, from London to Montecito, all the way to the upcoming coronation of King Charles. I'm Sean Mandell, a producer, pop culture devotee, and part-time royal correspondent.
And I'm Maggie Van Dorn, the show's producer, Sean's biggest fan, and his occasional sidekick.
In each episode, we will spill the tea.
That's American for gossip.
On the latest stories about the heir, the spare, and their kin. Tea will be served with some cultural context and history from across the pond that you can't go without. So without further ado, let's spill the royal tea. So Easter happened this week, and we saw the royals on parade, as they tend to do on these big outings.
The Waleses.
The Waleses, Prince William and Princess Kate, as she now is, their kids, all sort of wonderfully color coordinated in shades of blue, looking just very cute. And again, like the J. Crew catalog couple that they are.
Except that Kate was very subversive in her nail color. It was a classic red.
Classic to many people, not to members of the royal family. People, of course, there's always some media outlet that says that this was shocking. She broke royal protocol. And
there's like 10 media outlets that are saying she broke royal
protocol. It is a classic
protocol.
story, and it was one that was written about Meghan. And it's interesting that Kate is doing this now after, we didn't really see her wear a lot of wild colors, nail polish, when the Queen was alive. Ballet slipper. Yep, that was the one that the Queen liked. So Kate towed the line. But maybe she's feeling like she has a little bit more freedom now. So I say good for her.
Yeah, it looked good on her.
One other interesting thing from the Easter procession is that we saw Prince Andrew, disgraced though he may be over accusations of sexual assault, that have pushed him from the main fold of royal life. He was walking right behind King Charles and Queen Camilla in that procession, which nothing happens on accident with photographs and optics. And it kind of suggests that maybe he is back in the fold somewhat with Charles, or he's on better terms with them. It was very weird. People didn't really love it.
Yeah, why he was included in that shot.
No. Some other interesting news. There was a report that came out this week from a new book about the royals that Kate found the day that she had to do this walkabout with meet mourners outside of Windsor Castle after the Queen passed away. She did so with her husband and also with Meghan and Harry. It was the first time we'd seen them together in a very long time.
Oh, and I think we were all shocked. I mean, first of all, we were all shocked to see this, right? Like no one expected, because this was post-Oprah interview.
This was post-Oprah interview, pre-Netflix series and pre-Spare. So important to think of the timeline there. But William invited them, Meghan and Harry, to come with them on this little, as they call it, a walkabout to meet the mourners together and try and show a sign of unity. And apparently Kate had said to a senior member of the royal family that it was the most difficult day of her life. So, I'll just leave that with you all to take what you want from that observation.
Yeah, I think that we're always looking for an opportunity to sort of take down a royal
Sure.
or to, be critical. And if this is truly the hardest day of her life or one of the hardest things she's had to do, then she's clearly lived a very privileged life.
Right.
At the same time, I think as human beings, we can all relate to interpersonal conflict and having to navigate that before the eyes of the world.
And speaking hyperbolically, also maybe in casual conversation, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, who doesn't do that?
Right. Like this, if this, by the way, is not something that she said publicly. This is something that's been leaked from royal sources in this new book by Robert Jobson. And we always have to question royal sources because they are unnamed. So, I think that it's not too out of the realm of possibility that if she did say this, that it was not necessarily...
it wasn't meant for our ears.
It wasn't meant for our ears and was certainly casual conversation. But
yeah,
who's to say for certain?
Nonetheless, it's out there.
It's out there. And another revelation from that same book from Robert Jobson, which has a lot of headlines that's generating, but these are two of we found are kind of the more interesting ones, is that the Queen apparently suggested to Meghan when she joined the royal family that she speak with then Sophie, her name, she was the Countess of Wessex at the time. She's married to Prince Edward, who was the Queen's youngest, Queen Elizabeth's youngest child, and she is now the Duchess of Edinburgh, but I digress. And she had been a successful businesswoman before she married Edward. She had her own PR company, and the Queen apparently suggested that Meghan go and talk to her about, what it's like and, how to navigate going from a working woman to being a working royal. And Meghan said, I have Harry. That basically she didn't need Sophie. She had her man to help her navigate this transition.
Yeah, but given how Meghan did ultimately navigate her transition to royal life, I think we really have to ask, did she have Harry?
And was that a good choice?
Right.
Like, maybe another opinion, another voice in the room could have been helpful. Hindsight's 2020. Now, those headlines aside, one undercurrent that we've been talking about during this entire season has been the element of race and racism, accusations that the royal family is institutionally racist, that maybe specific members, high-ranking members of the royal family have at least done or said racist things. And the question now is, how does the monarchy go on in the future when there is this sort of, dark cloud hanging over? This was supposed to be a joyous celebration of the coronation, but people have these questions about race and, how can a monarchy exist if these accusations are true? So I wanted to bring in guest Nazir Afzal. He is a former prosecutor in the UK and a individual who's now the Chancellor of Manchester University. He's spoken a lot about issues of race as they pertain to, political questions, and also about, Meghan and Harry, himself being a person of color and a person who has attended, a Buckingham Palace functions. He attended a big event in December of 2022 where there was a quote-unquote race row about whether a lady in waiting to the Queen, made some racist statements and got into a sort of racist scuffle with a black civil rights campaigner. On top of that, Nazir is an OBE. He is an officer of the British Empire, a title that the monarch, gives out. So that's something that he received from Queen Elizabeth back in 2005. And I think it's really interesting to talk to someone who, is critical of certain aspects of, the institution of the monarchy and raising questions about, the issue of race, but is also somewhat, from what we can tell and what I think he's going to tell us, a advocate for the monarchy in some form or fashion. Nazir, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Spilling Royalty.
You're most welcome. Delighted to join you.
So obviously we are talking about the run-up to King Charles's coronation. There's been a lot of news over the past weeks, and we've talked to some people across the pond. We're here in the U.S., but I was wondering, are people excited about the coronation?
I've sat through and lived through jubilees and weddings and the like. I've not known anything like this. There's hardly any excitement.
Really?
I think there might be, because we're still 2.5 weeks away, and it's sort of building slowly but surely. But I think there's been so much controversy, I think, which has probably taken the shine off the event so far. I have no doubt on the 6th of May it'll be a phenomenal event. You know, Britain is very good at pomp and ceremony, isn't it?
Yes.
And I have no doubt that it'll be fantastic and everybody will be watching. But in the run-up to it, Sean, it's been muted, really. And I think that you have to also think of the context. The United Kingdom is currently going through, I'm sure the rest of the world is, but the United Kingdom particularly is going through crisis of cost of living. There's the war in Ukraine not far away. There's the repercussions from leaving the European Union. People are struggling financially. And I think the idea of having a multi-million-pound ceremony hasn't gone down particularly well with everybody. And so I think the monarchy are alive to that. So they've I think made some cuts, if that's the right word, to make it a little bit more acceptable. However, every single time you hear something, for example, we learned that the government have spent £8 million on portraits that will be sent to every school, college, institution of the new king. And previously wouldn't have batted an eyelid, but now £8 million on pictures of the king.
Every penny is sort of being scrutinized.
Exactly, every little thing. And when they announced the route, the route, for those who may not know, from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey, where the coronation takes place,
in the carriage, in a Jubilee carriage, which we've just learned.
Exactly. Rather than have the gold carriage go both ways, it's only going one way.
Right, because for our listeners who don't know, there are multiple carriages, which fancy, some of them more historical than others, carriages that could be taken on this procession route, and we've just learned, the details of Charles leaving Buckingham Palace, going to Westminster Abbey, and then coming back. So we have, as you mentioned, a different carriage arriving there, and then a gold, grand and opulent carriage taking him and Camilla back.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's they want to sort of play down the ostentatiousness of it by having the gold carriage only go half the way. I mean, it really does. That's the kind of thing we're dealing with, Sean, is that they are making some efforts to suggest that they recognize the state of the nation. And I think that's difficult when you're doing a coronation. But, then the question, of course, there's so much elements to this. I mean, the President Biden won't be coming, but the First Lady will. And President Biden is here right now in the United Kingdom for the Northern Ireland 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement.
Right.
And they're saying, why couldn't he come? And then somebody said, well, no president has ever come to a coronation.
Exactly.
All right. It's been 70 odd years since the last one, but
right. Maybe not precedent is so important here.
Exactly. But there are all sorts of these little shenanigans as to whether, when you do come, where would you sit? Who would you sit with? Do you attend the meal afterwards, the meal before? Honest to God, Sean, we need to get a life. Somebody needs to get a life.
So Nazir, you were at the Buckingham Palace reception that was hosted by Queen Camilla in December, where a civil rights campaigner was questioned by a lady in waiting, who is also the godmother of Prince William, the Prince of Wales, about where she was from. And this became a big story because she was pushing on the issue. It wasn't just one question. And, this campaigner is Black, and she was talking about where she's from in the UK. But the question obviously was very loaded and saying, like, where are your people from? Where do you descend from? And you had a conversation with Lady Susan Hussey as well.
Hussey, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I did, absolutely. I was pretty much the only man at the event where you had Mel B and God knows who else. I mean, it was an extraordinary event, and it was tied in relation to Violence Against Women and Girls Day, which is why there were so many activists in the room. And Lady Hussey approached me. We all had name badges, and mine's, because I was sponsored. My invitation came via the Welsh government, so mine said the Welsh government. and she asked me where I'm from, and I said the Welsh government, and she said, "No, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I was born in Birmingham and I live in Manchester," but that wasn't good enough. But yeah, I simply moved on. It wasn't important to me, but obviously the experience of the other person was a bit more persistent.
Sure.
But was that just a generational thing? There are people, and unfortunately, who of a certain age, older than me even, who find it very difficult to talk about issues of race, and particularly somebody who's traveled the world as Lady Hussey has. Maybe she wanted to know where she was from because she's probably visited that place, But anyway, the point is the perception was of racism linked to what experience Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, appeared to have had, linked to other concerns, linked to the fact that the British Empire is still a live issue, and large parts of the world. The United Kingdom had the control of the largest part of the world compared to any other nation ever, and so the British Empire itself is a live issue, and reparations in relation to the British Empire. You've then got the racism potentially in institutionalizing the organization. We've just left the European Union, which then also leads to this view that we're somehow, I don't know, better than the Europeans. There's all sorts of complexities, which make the issue of race a live one, and one that the royal family really haven't addressed very well. And the first time, publicly, a non-white member becomes a member of the royal family, and her experience, as articulated, has been very poor. One begins to think, was race a part? It's difficult to argue otherwise.
I think it's a very interesting point, and I think the heart of the questions about race and the royal family. One thing that I think is really interesting is that Meghan has made these statements. One can call them accusations about how she was treated by the royal family. But recently, there's been some ambiguity about really how Meghan and Harry, or maybe just specifically Harry, view what happened to them, like while they were members of the royal family, because Harry had this interview with Tom Bradby, in the UK, after the release of his book Spare, and Tom Bradby very plainly, said that Harry and Meghan had more or less accused the royal family of racism, and Harry bristled at that and said, "No, we didn't. No, I didn't." And that, I think, shocked a lot of people, because that kind of was the takeaway that many had from that Oprah interview, with the conversations about Archie's skin and everything else that Meghan shared, was that even if you don't want to call people themselves racist, that there was racism, and that there was racist actions. But Harry kind of backpedaled on that.
Yeah, he did, and he didn't. Again, the diplomat would tell you that's the right thing to do. If you want to reconcile with somebody, you begin to put your first view, or whatever you said first, in a different context. So yes, absolutely. When they mentioned it in the Oprah interview, there could be only really be one interpretation. But now, then as time has passed, and knowing that you want to somehow resolve this so that you can be a family again, you will try and play it down. I think that's what he was trying to do. He was simply trying to play it down. It's not that important. And what did the royal family say? Recollections may vary.
Recollections may vary, the famous phrase.
Yeah. So, and that's the reality with life. Recollections do vary. And I think, so I suspect, actually, I have no inside knowledge. I suspect this is all part of the process of some re-engagement.
Time has passed since that interview, and maybe this is an olive branch that he was trying to offer to the royal family.
I think absolutely that. At the end of the day, the royal family has bigger things to deal with, and there are Caribbean nations that want independence. They want to follow in the footsteps of others, and so there's a number of countries who are part of the British Commonwealth that no longer want the monarch, the British monarch, as their head of state. And so there are bigger issues that need to be addressed.
What do you think is, if you were to boil down, if Buckingham Palace were to bring you in, as a sort of wartime consigliere to get your input on, on this question of race and relevancy, what should the royal family do, to not just reconcile with accusations and, things that have been leveled against them, but actually move forward in a positive way on the question of race, to say that the royal family is still relevant, despite its past, despite its, despite accusations that it has faced on racism.
Well, what they won't do is anything public. I mean, we're not going to have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee post-apartheid. That's not going to happen. It'll be done privately. There'll be a private conversation where William and Harry, perhaps, and their father, potentially, and maybe a couple of advisors, will sit and have a conversation, at which Meghan and Kate will undoubtedly have a follow-up conversation. It'll be one of those things that, if hasn't happened already, the idea is that there is a process. I imagine that process is going to be followed. So if going back to optics, if you want the royal family to reassure a Caribbean nation that getting rid of the monarch as your head of state is not the biggest deal right now, it would be better hearing that from Harry and Meghan than it would do from William or Kate, or from Charles and Camilla. So they could be very useful ambassadors on the worldwide stage, and I think that's the leverage I think Harry and Meghan have to enable them to get back in, so to speak, into relative good books, but at the same time also be able to do so on their own terms.
Kate and William have generally received more support than Meghan and Harry in the UK, on social media, in polls, in media generally. I think that's, fair to say, just sort of taking, the temperature. Meghan and Harry, again, there are generational issues, or, generational divides to maybe be discussed, but they do seem to be, for lack of a better word, hated by a big chunk of the population in the UK. I think
that's too strong. I think that's too strong.
You think it's too strong?
Too strong. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was in a railway station bookshop the other day, and there was Prince Harry's book on the front. There were two women, I don't know who they were, talking to each other. One was going, I would never buy it. And the other was going, why not? I'm sure it's a really interesting read.
Right.
I think, if you read the newspapers, and I used the word royal sources earlier on, for a reason. There is a reason why we have royal sources. Every newspaper in the United Kingdom has royal correspondents.
Right.
They live off what they're told and what they receive, etc., etc. So it's not a case of 50% or 60% in favor of Kate and William, 40. Actually, I think it is a generational thing. I think if you ask most people under 30 or 40, certainly young people, they're very supportive of Harry and Meghan. Very supportive of Harry and Meghan. And I think, but the point is, why are we getting so worked up about this whatever tension they may have? At the end of the day, they both lost their mother. A lot of people, we haven't touched on Queen Camilla, by the way. A lot of people are upset at the fact that it's not Queen Diana.
Right. I mean, it's something I'll tell you candidly, for myself in a personal, in a personal story. I mean, you think about it, right? If you had any sort of affection or affinity towards Diana, you do think about, what might have been. And I think there were a lot of people who, loved the idea from, certainly anecdotally loved the idea of when she was married to Charles, of thinking of Diana being queen.
I mean, we do that. We do. But at the same time, Sean, it's going to the woman that was having an affair with her husband while she was married to him, according to her and other sources. So it just doesn't feel right somehow. And of course, initially she was going to be the Queen Consort,
right?
As if it means anything. But now she will just be called Queen Camilla, which people are saying, well, I didn't vote for a Queen Camilla, Well,
they didn't vote for anyone, right? Yeah.
But you get their point. Their point is that that they've been.
Well, and before she was supposed to just be princess consort, right? I mean, like the line keeps moving, and it's not surprising given that Charles can kind of do what more or less what he wants on this subject.
Well, he can, of course, he can, but you just add that to the debate and the discussion, which might suggest why people are not as looking forward to this with the same desire and ambition they would have had if it was, I don't know, didn't have any of the shenanigans around it.
Right.
But it as I say, it's a soap opera, and it'll go on and it'll carry on. I think there are questions about the monarchy, which is it still relevant? People are asking. It's amazing. People are asking that question that never asked that question before.
Well, that's what I think. That's an interesting. I think that's an interesting point, right? Is that because Queen Elizabeth reigned for as long as she did, because the monarchy was taken for granted in some ways, and because she was, I think, more or less if not, more generous than this, a benign figure to many. Now people are being forced to think about the monarchy, and I wonder, what you see on the ground there and what you've heard in terms of what conversations about what the future of the monarchy is or may be, and also just from your own personal point of view. You're an OBE, officer of the British Empire, made by Queen Elizabeth in 2005. I'm curious how you feel about the monarchy and where it goes from here.
I mean, as I say, I think the days when there were more dukes than there are in Hazard have gone now. Literally, there. Until recently, until the Queen's passing, there was a Duke of this and a Duke of that. The royal family was enormous, and people, it didn't have the respect it deserved. Everything focused on the Queen. Whilst the Queen was here, and God bless her, she was a real force of nature. She did have a sense of people did not want to have a conversation about the monarchy while she was the monarch.
Right.
But now that she's not the monarch, there are people now having open conversations about what the monarchy should look like. I think the broad view, and my view, is a slimmed down monarch of the type that you have in Europe, where you have a king and a queen and maybe a couple of princes, and that's it, or a princess, and that's it, and everybody else can fend for themselves. But of course, there is now a larger group of people that are questioning whether we need a monarchy at all.
Right, which is a conversation that, has never happened as much and is gaining steam, I think.
Very much so. I mean, there was obviously, there have always been Republicans, but there's never been
Republicans, by the way, in the UK, very different than Republicans in the US, exactly. For our American listeners.
Yeah. Exactly that. People who don't want a monarchy are Republicans in the UK. And there have always been those, but it's just ordinary people who think, well, hang on a minute, it seems a bit stupid and a bit foolish to spend all this money on all this estate. The largest estate holders are the royal family. Then why don't we have a president like you have, or why don't we have a state figure that we can look up to for 4 years, 5 years, and then have another one, Right. And I think that conversation we never had in this country, not in a sizable way. I mean, there was always that small group, but I think people are beginning to have that, and that's unfortunate.
You think it's unfortunate?
I think it's unfortunate because it would be a seismic change for how the United Kingdom operates. The United Kingdom has, as you know, a parliamentary democracy, and we vote for our prime minister, we vote for parties, we vote for our prime minister, and at the end of the day, that works. And the monarch is an advisor. But if you start electing a president, people will be wondering who really has the power. And right. I think would be problematic. The Queen never had, the monarch technically has no power.
The monarch can, technically has the power to dissolve parliament and ask for a new government.
Exactly that. But and also to refuse to do so. Right. So if the prime minister of the UK went to the king and said, I don't think my government has any confidence, I want to resign, he could say, no, you stay.
Get back to work.
Get back to work. Your election is in January 2025.
Right, you have a term to serve.
There is that power. Yeah. There is that power, but the idea of it being used in the 21st century is extremely remote.
Speaking of the idea of monarchy in the 21st century, there is, as you say, a growing movement of people who are questioning whether the monarchy has a place in the world we live in today. There are people as well, I mentioned that, you have an OBE. There are people such as Alan Cumming, the actor who has, turned in, renounced his OBE because of the toxicity of empire. And I'm wondering, that for individuals such as yourself, you do support a version of the monarchy in this world. Is there a tipping point for you or for, others, that you see such as yourselves who value a slimmed down monarchy? But is there a tipping point where it no longer becomes, worthwhile?
I think it'll come. I mean, it's difficult to say what it would be, but given how toxic things are, I mean, it's not far away. I mean, something terrible could happen. I mean, one could imagine something happening to Harry and Meghan, for example.
And I think you could argue that the controversies and the tensions with Harry and Meghan and the royal family are very much a propellant behind that movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And there will undoubtedly be, and of course, Andrew is another example. There will undoubtedly be,
or the lack of focus on Andrew compared to Harry and Meghan.
Exactly that. So it doesn't feel fair. If it doesn't feel fair, then why do you support something that's not fair? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a lawyer first and foremost, and it's all about fairness and justice. And if it feels unjust, well, why should I be supporting it? So I think there is that. At the moment, the jury's out, for want of a better term. And I suspect there'll be a honeymoon period after the coronation, hopefully as long as nothing terrible, no punch up at the Abbey. But as long as everything goes as one anticipates, there'll be a bit of a honeymoon period. There'll be some time for reconciliation. They'll find a way through this, and they'll be able to manage going forward. I think if that doesn't happen, and if they're still sniping at each other, in between the hedgerows and throwing stuff at each other from across the Atlantic, then I can imagine a lot of people thinking, well, I don't want to be part of this.
Nazir, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insight. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Cheers.
I really think that Nazir's perspective and his experience is so valuable, Maggie. Like when we're talking about this fundamental question about the future of the monarchy, which is really, I think, the crux of many of our conversations. And I think it's so interesting that he does believe that there is a role, for the monarchy, but also is speaking to this question of reform, of
reckoning with colonialism of the past and racist implications of the present.
Exactly. And looking at, Meghan and Harry's role in the future of the monarchy. I thought it was fascinating that he said, that Meghan and Harry could be and maybe should be really essential to the monarchy surviving, like bringing them back into the fold in some ways as ambassadors, or at least, saying, like voicing their support more for the monarchy rather than sniping at them. And that's going to be a big question, whether we ever get back to that place.
Yeah, it was a really balanced reflection on Meghan and Harry that surprised me, because a lot of what we have heard from the UK is just straight up criticism and vitriol against Meghan and Harry. And so he offered something that felt balanced, tempered, and, even spoke from his own experience.
Exactly. So until next week, I'm Sean Mandell, and thanks for listening to Spilling Royal Tea. Spilling Royal Tea is a production of the TMZ Audio Network. It's produced by Maggie Van Dorn. Wild Young is our in-studio producer. Make sure you never miss an episode and subscribe or follow Spilling Royal Tea on your favorite podcast app. And if you like the show, share it with a friend or someone you know who likes to spill the tea. You can also help us grow the podcast by rating and reviewing Spilling Royal Tea on Apple Podcasts. I'm your host, Sean Mandell. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk next week.